Sia, thank you for joining us. Today I want us to critique breaking new ground, the housing policy,
Okay.
through a Foucauldian lens, particularly his work on discipline and punishment.
Yeah.
I'm arguing that housing isn't just about shelter, it's a system of urban control.
Sure. Yeah, that's a powerful frame to start off. Yeah, yeah, I read that paper of yours. I mean, Foucault teaches us that power doesn't really need change to dominate. Like it flows really through institutions, norms, and even architecture. So, in the context of breaking new ground, housing policy in South Africa, I would say that housing functions like a disciplinary parameters. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The policy doesn't just locate people in space, it scripts how they should live,
Mm.
behave, and imagine themselves as citizens.
Yeah. Housing as a discipline architecture. Because when I read that paper, that is the first thing that came into mind. Housing as architecture.
Mm.
Yeah, and it reminds me, particularly in this book, just the overall analysis of Foucault's in prison,
Mm.
The cell becomes like a tool to discipline the body through like isolation and surveillance and like repetition. In a breaking new ground housing perspective, I think like you could somewhat see the similar logic, but in a more of like a standardized home, in a more of a repetitive grids on like the city edge for me.
Yes, yes. The body is governed spatially.
Mm.
The house isn't just a structure. It disciplines daily life, your morning routine, your access to transport, and even your silence. All of that is designed.
Okay. I want us to like let's not forget that to own a house, it like becomes a synonymous with being developed or civilized. And like that's classical like normalization. So people who want rent to share or live informally, for some reason they are framed as lacking something. I don't know. Mm.
Surveillance also shifts in planning.
Yeah.
It's not just about the state watching, it's the residents themselves
Yeah.
watching each other. Foucault's panopticon isn't a metaphor,
Mm.
it's happening in cul-de-sacs and fenced yards.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Having having trying to interpret what you just said, man. Yeah, obviously, in some case I would agree. And what's terrifying for me is how this self surveillance kind of like becomes internalized.
Mm.
People start disciplining themselves. Cutting their grass on time, painting their walls beige, avoiding gatherings that may look what normalization would be like unruly. I don't know if you
That's
can-
true, that's true. They regulate themselves because they've been made visible. Numbered plots, street names, GPS coordinates, planning renders people legible, and legibility becomes control.
And and let's not forget, for some reason, invisibility becomes criminality. And if you're off the map, say, for instance, in an informal settlement,
Mm.
right, we're looking at Foucault's thingy, or unregistered backyard rooms, you're often treated as a threat and not rather as a citizen. I don't know, man.
Mm.
It's one thing to consider.
Yeah, I agree.
And yeah, I don't know how to drive this thing I want to drive out. Essentially, Foucault for me like speaks about normalization like as a tool for disciplining power. In housing, BNG policies push for like a narrow ideal,
Mm.
like a nuclear family in a brick house with like formal employment and municipal bills. Like that's what I think in the ideals of BNG.
And those who fall outside of that template, as young people without jobs, single mothers, migrants, they become abnormal, undesirable, and unfit for housing.
Undesirable and unfit for housing. That sounds subtle but devastating.
Right?
So housing for me like becomes like a moral judgment. If you cannot produce stability economically or socially,
Mm.
you are essentially have a barrier from these state spatial legitimacy. I don't know if that makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Access to space becomes conditional and conforming to a particular idea of respectability.
But if yeah, but for me, having looked at BNGs, my understanding of BNGs as well, going to the conversation, is that Foucault kind of also like allows us to read resistance, because what you call this for our viewers, I want you guys to understand that informality like isn't failure, it's refusal. It's people designing like their lives, on their own terms outside of these disciplinary scripts. I don't know if you can.
Yes, it's improvision as defiance. Backyard rooms, informal transports, even spaza shops. There's spatial acts of autonomy.
Um, and for some reason, planning also responds with eradication instead of engagement. Because, for instance, informal settlements are often framed as chaotic, that need to be fixed, instead of being spatial vocabularies that need to be understood.
That's why we need to rethink what counts as legitimate urban knowledge. If planning only listens to architects and engineers, it misses the genius of lived experience.
Lived experience. Yeah, lived experience. I know, I'm just trying to, that thing we were just throwing out a lot of information, just trying to gather your own perspectives around these different conversations.
It's a tough one.
Yeah. So yeah, I would like for us like to kind of go back to like the spatial form of things.
Okay.
Because for me, what I realize is that Foucault reminds us that space really isn't neutral; it's really political, and the way that RDP like layouts, prisons, isn't coincidental. Like I'm sorry for my tongue, like to all my viewers. It's part of a larger like apparatus of control.
Yes. The repetition of houses, the lack of space, the positioning on the urban periphery. Come to think of it, it discourages assembly, protest, collectivity. That's not just bad design, it's anti-politics.
Yeah, I'd like to agree on that because I believe that spatial fragmentation kind of weakens solidarity. If each household is isolated, the struggles can't become collective. That's power functioning through disconnection, if that makes sense.
So even infrastructure, streets, walls, and electricity is part of the disciplinary toolkit. Wow.
Yeah.
So how do we challenge this? How do we build housing that frees rather than disciplines?
That's that's an interesting question. I'll say to answer that for me, perhaps our viewers maybe might agree or disagree. Maybe they'll say that in the comments. We really need to start by valuing informal intelligence. Not to just like radically formalize it, but to learn from it. Because I'm a firm believer that planning must shift from like a controlling space to more of an enabling freedom within it.
Exactly.
That's what I think.
People need to design, reshape, reimagine space. What if planning gave us tools instead of templates? What if it asked questions instead of imposing answers?
Yeah, and that also even makes me ask another question to say like, okay, what if state trusted its own people enough to let go? I don't know. Is it good to let people trust their own space and give them a sense of control? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. But I truly believe Foucault told us to look beneath the surface of systems.
Yeah.
Housing is never just about homes. It's about all kinds of people and cities we're allowed to become.
Oh, okay.
And the cities we're allowed to become.
Wow. So in that sense, the city becomes a site of struggle, between order and, I would say, imagination,
Mm-hmm.
between discipline and freedom. I don't know. So, just to end us off, before we move into our 2 other episodes in the near future, I just want us to conclude with this conversation. I will say that let's plan cities that make room for life, not just for control. And to our viewers, especially you guys, please do check out the paper that we were discussing, and perhaps you can give us feedback and
tell us what you
around.
think.
Yeah, tell us what you think, man. So yeah, this is Israel Kamoya, guys. So yeah,
We'll see you next time, guys.
Yeah,
Bye.
so yeah, stay tuned.